The monetary order is breaking apart as we live and breathe. This is not a recession. It's not even a soft landing. This is not a rate cut cycle or a rate cycle hiking. This is the breakdown of the monetary order itself. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, listen on, because I'm really not. History tells us exactly how this ends, and it always ends in the same fashion. When the debt explodes, when currencies are diluted, when rising powers challenge declining ones, the outcome is never a mild, tempered, well-mannered slowdown. It's a reset, it's a collapse, or it's a conflict. The 1930s weren't an accident, Weimar Republic wasn't an accident, they were just a preview. Recessions are when people lose their jobs. Monetary resets are when people realize that their savings already did. The savings already exploded and the horse has already bolted from the barn. Let's talk about the mechanism really clearly. This is monetary order decay. When systems fail, debt grows faster than productivity, money grows faster than the trusts, power shifts faster than the institutions can adapt. Every reserve currency under these conditions always dies in the exact same way. Not loudly, not suddenly, but respectfully ignored until it's too late to actually ignore what's written on the wall. The dollar isn't collapsing, it's just being politely diluted while everyone pretends not to notice. And that's the most insidious and pernicious form of a monetary collapse. Recessions are bad, but why is this type of monetary order reset even worse? Well, a recession is cyclical in nature. This is more structural. Recessions clean out the excesses. System resets erase assumptions. They erase paradigms. They erase those safety nets. What's worse than a recession? It's a currency reset. What's worse than that? A power reset. And what's worse than even that? Governments deciding inflation is cheaper than institutional honesty. And that's where we're sitting right now. In a recession, politicians always say this is transitory, this is temporary. In a reset, they say this is for your own good. Get on, join the party line, get in tow, be patriotic, be nationalistic, we're all in this together. But it never ends well for the normal person, for me and you, for the saver, for the person who's followed all the rules, worked hard, and still sees their currencies and their savings eroded and debased, their quality of life eroded completely. This is an empire cycle. Every empire follows the exact same arc. The trajectory, the telemetry that every single empire follows is rise. The rise in productivity, the rise in leverage, the rise in dominance, the rise in inequalities. The decline is always the debt, the inequality, and the reset is always the restructuring. That's loosely how every single empire ends. No empire ever retires peacefully. They always say they're different, and they always say we can continue it until the actual bill arrives. Because empires don't fall because they're evil per se. They fall because the compound interest eventually notices them. It sees who is mendacious, and it sees who can't fund themselves and roll over the debt into perpetuity. There are 5 pivotal pressures that end up breaking every empire. The first one is debt and money. Makes sense, right? Debt grows faster than income. That guarantees dilution of the currency. No country repays unpayable debt by definition. They redefine what repayment means. Printing money isn't actually theft. It's just taxation without the awkward conversation in this paradigm. And that's how they justify ever increasing debt, ever increasing spending, ever increasing deficits, because the bill has to come due. And unless they start running faster or they start taxing us more, they can never really pay it off. Number 2 is always characterized as an internal disorder. When inequality peaks, the trust has to collapse. Politics turns into tribalistic politics. Institutions lose all of their credibility. Everyone thinks the system is rigged because mathematically, it actually is. When nobody trusts the elections, the media, the money, the politicians, at least they're finally consistent with their belief systems. And number 3 is always an external type of conflict. Rising powers challenge declining ones. Trade fragments, sanctions replace cooperation. The dollar becomes a tool and not a neutral bridge of just transactionality. And neutral systems don't get abandoned quickly. Weaponized ones do, and that's what we're seeing now. The swift weaponization, balance of trade weaponization, dollar weaponization. Reserve currencies work best when they don't come with terms and conditions, and these ones come with a plethora of terms and conditions. Not only who you can be friends with, not only who you can fraternize with, but who you can't. And the rules-based order no longer exists in the way that it did before. 4 is going to be the shock events, pandemics, the wars, the supply chain failures du jour. They don't cause the collapse immediately, but they expose the leverage that's deeply embedded within the system and that keeps everything lubricated. Because crises don't actually break systems. They just remove the makeup. They remove the veneer, the patina of respectability. And then, number 5, which is probably the most prescient and the most important to our conversations nowadays, is the technological shock. There is always a technological shock. It could be a horse and cart carriage, it could be an automobile, it could be a train, it could be AI. Now, AI boosts productivity. Sure, eventually, definitely does. We're talking about Claude, we're talking about Anthropic, we're talking about Gemini. It's definitely going to displace things. And that's the first thing that's going to happen, the displacement of workers en masse. Then it forces governments to subsidize the stability. It forces them to subsidize the people who lose their jobs. Then it gets blamed for inflation that it didn't actually cause. And then it relies on productivity increasing so that the job displacement actually doesn't hurt the economy as much as it will. Because AI won't actually steal your job, it will just make your salary not keep up with inflation anymore.
Let's get to the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is this. What does this actually mean for the dollar? That's what we're all interested in, because if you get the direction of the dollar correct, your portfolio normally goes correctly and well as well. The dollar isn't dying, boys and girls. For those of you who are disappointed, I'm duly sorry. But it is being diluted. Reserve currencies don't just vanish. They lose purchasing power, they lose influence, and they definitely lose exclusivity. Treasuries are still going to exist for a long time. Demand's just going to get, let's say, a little less enthusiastic. The dollar didn't lose reserve status. It just stopped being everyone's favorite reserve. It stopped being everyone's most favored friend at the party, and it definitely stopped being in the top tier allocations of central banks' reserve asset distributions. This leads us to what we position in and with, and why hard assets are always going to be the ones to save you and protect you, and always are the ones that move first. Gold doesn't predict collapse, but it does price in debasement. It prices in dilution. It prices in malfeasance, profligacy, and lack of competence in managing a budget on a sovereign level. Silver doesn't signal panic, but it definitely does signal currency stress. Bitcoin doesn't replace money. I hate to say it to you Bitcoin maximalists, but it does, however, reflect distrust in the people managing the monetary systems. Markets move before narratives. It's always the same. It's not the other way around. Gold isn't just paranoid. Silver isn't thinking someone's chasing them. And copper isn't conspiratorial. They're just old enough to remember the last few resets and what they did the last few times and how the playbook went the last few times, because nothing ever changed. So we should ask ourselves, can the system actually be saved? Do we want the system to be saved? How do we position ourselves for the eventual liquidity flood that's coming in an antediluvian fashion? There are only ever 3 exits, and Noah's Ark isn't one of them. Productivity miracles without inflation. That assumes that the productivity is going to be so robust that it ameliorates any hit to the economy from things like AI. AI is going to save us to such an extent that the losses in employment don't really matter. We can beat that rate of inflation because we're gaining it in productivity gains. Number 2 is inflation without admitting that it's actually inflation. So they might move the target, they might move the goalpost, they might say that they're targeting inflation in another way, they might exclude something like volatile fuel and energy costs. And number 3 is a reset without a new explanation. A new monetary regime, a new gold standard, taking off the gold standard, Bretton Woods, something like that. History always says governments choose the option that delays the most pain, even if it multiplies later for you and me, and yours truly, and the taxpayer, because they always want to stay in power. That is the government's business. The business of government is always government. Policymakers don't solve problems, they just refinance them, they delay them, they elongate them, they try to ameliorate them, but they never truly solve them. But what does this mean for me? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for our children? This isn't fear, it's positioning, it's reallocation. Resets transfer wealth from cash into assets, savers into long-term holders, trust into tangibility. And this is how we need to be thinking about this new monetary regime, this new system that we are being forced to participate in. The monetary system that's being thrusted upon us without even the courtesy of a vote. You don't need to predict the outcome though. You need to survive the mechanism. Cash feels right up until it isn't worth keeping safe anymore. Just ask the Germans in the 1940s, when a wheelbarrow of cash wasn't enough to buy a piece of moldy bread. Or ask any other sovereign that has collapsed because their currency has not been able to maintain purchasing power. This is not a recession. It's worse than a recession. It's a system transition. I'm not Gordon Brown, the late, well not late, but the previous UK Chancellor and then Prime Minister, who wasn't voted in by the way, but that's an aside. And I don't think he once famously said, oh, we've defeated boom and bust. I'm not that kind of guy. I do believe that boom and bust still exists. Recessions still definitely exist, and depressions can still definitely occur. But this isn't this time. This is a system reset, a system transition. Debt, dilution, disorder, reset. Debt, dilution, disorder, reset. That's the cycle. And the only real risk now is believing that this time is different, or that this time will be gentler than every other time before it. History never repeats itself. It just charges you with interest. I know that's not the quote and I butchered it, but you get my drift. Bastardizations aside, I'm Justin Banton. This is the House of Trade. Ciao for now.